Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, I wanted to start today's episode with what I think is a very exciting announcement, and it's something that I've been working on for some extended period of time, and I really feel like it's a God thing. And I think it's the next stepping stone in the forward progress of the power of purity. And that is, I'm announcing that this year, 2020, we're going to be offering what I'm calling the Pathway to Purity Intensive Workshop. And it's going to be a 3-day intensive that will change men's lives. And at this intensive, men are going to gain the practical insights and understandings and tools that are necessary to learn to manage their sexual gift in a healthier way, to learn to bring their sexual gift under the authority of Christ, and to change their relationship with their sexual self. And we're going to offer the intensive 4 times this year in 2020, one in March, one in June, one in September, and one in December. So we're going to offer an intensive workshop for each of the 4 quarters of 2020. And if you go to the Power of Purity website, there's a link at the top of the page. It says Intensive Workshop. If you click on that link, there's a whole information page there, and you'll be able to check it out and get all the information you need. The intensive is going to be 3 days, beginning Friday night, then all day Saturday, and most of the day Sunday. And we designed it this way on purpose, so a guy typically only has to miss 1 day of work. You can actually travel on Friday, arrive in St. Louis. We start the intensive Friday night with a 3-hour session, 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Then it's going to be 12 hours on Saturday and 8 hours on Sunday, 8:30 to 4:30 on Sunday. So the intensive will end Sunday afternoon at 4:30, so a guy can fly back home on Sunday evening and hopefully only have to miss 1 day of work then. And in the way of introduction, guys, let me just say that I'm really excited about this. I personally have been on a journey, a kind of quest toward the goal of sexual purity in my own heart and life. If you know my story, you know that I was a very deeply broken man, and I had a lot of issues, and my struggle with my sexual self literally almost destroyed my marriage and my family, my ministry, and my very life. So I've been on this journey for at least the past 25 years, and over that time, I went to therapy for over 6 years. I've written 3 books on the topic of sexual purity. I started a conference called the Power of Purity Conference that I would present to live audiences. And then I recorded 30 videos on the topic of sexual purity. That video conference is available at the website. And then I ended up going to Covenant Theological Seminary. I got my master's degree in counseling. And then I felt led by God to start this podcast. And if you're listening to me right now, you know all about this podcast. And I've now crossed the threshold of over 200 episodes, which I'm very excited about, and we're going to continue to move forward. And then I went on and I got certified as an EMDR therapist. And my point here, guys, isn't to tout my credentials or anything like that, but the point I'm making is that I've been on this journey around this issue and this topic of sexual purity for a long time. And over these years, God has worked deeply and powerfully in my own heart and life. And as I've learned and as I've grown and developed in this, I've created a kind of body of work with the books that I've written, the conferences that I've developed, the sessions, the podcast, getting my master's degree, my formal training. All of this comes together, and there's kind of this huge body of work that I've created over the past 25 years. And the point that I'm making is that what I'm doing with this intensive, you guys, is I'm taking this body of work and I'm boiling it down, the concept of a common denominator. You know how they say an entire forest is in a single acorn. Because if you took that acorn and you planted it, eventually an oak tree would grow and would become a giant oak tree, and that oak tree would make hundreds and then thousands of other acorns, and those acorns would sprout and become other oak trees, which would make more acorns. And if you came back in time, there would be a big forest there. And in one sense, that whole forest came out of one acorn, a kind of common denominator. And that's my goal with this 3-day intensive, you guys. If a man comes to this intensive and invests these hours, these 3 days of his life, you're going to learn in 3 days the basic information, the practical insights and understandings and tools that you need. I'm going to try to boil it down to the absolute basic building blocks of sexual purity, what a man needs to know, so that in those 3 days he's going to get the tools he needs that can literally become the fulcrum in his life where he will cross a line of demarcation. And so I'm just really, really excited about this. I intend to have a variety of tools that we're going to use in the workshop. There'll be teaching, of course. We'll break into small groups and have interaction. There'll be group discussions. I intend to use a lot of video in the teaching. There'll be time for individual reflection and for guys to do assignments. So it's going to be a powerful weekend. It's going to be significant. It's going to be life-changing. So if you're interested in attending one of these intensive workshops, the Pathway to Purity intensive workshop, go to the Power of Purity website. At the top is a link, intensive workshop. If you check out that link, there's a lot of information there. There's a registration form, and I would love to meet you personally. If you want to think about it, if you want to pray about it, take a journey to St. Louis, come to this Pathway to Purity intensive workshop, and I'll look forward to meeting you and trust that God's going to move in a powerful and significant way as He continues to bring forth His kingdom in our hearts and our lives and even in our sexual selves. So God bless you. And with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast, and thank you so much for being with me today and for tuning into this episode, and I pray that it will be a blessing and an encouragement to you as you continue forward in your journey of purity with the Lord. So God bless you. And I'm sure you're going to be blessed by today's episode and by next week's episode, because I have a very special guest with us today, and his name is Ben Bennett. So let me just start off by saying, hey, Ben.
Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a guest. And some folks might know who you are, others might not. So I always like to start off by just giving you the opportunity to share with us just a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Are you married? Do you have kids? What's your job? Just a little bit about Ben Bennett.
Yeah, totally. So I currently live in Dallas, Texas. Been here for about 2 years. And
really?
Work with, yeah.
My older brother. I have an older brother in Dallas.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's a good place. Good place to be. I work with Josh McDowell Ministry, which is a ministry of Campus Crusade for Christ, or Cru as we call it in the U.S.
Right. No doubt most of our listeners will be familiar with Cru and with Josh McDowell. So how long have you been with Josh McDowell Ministries?
Yeah, Josh McDowell Ministry for 2 years, and before that I was with the campus ministry of Cru here in the U.S., but out in Virginia.
And for how long now have you been in this ministry? Did I read since 2011? Yeah,
since 2011
okay.
In the ministry as a whole. So.
Okay, good for you. How old are you, can I ask?
Yeah, I'm 30 and single, and get to speak and write with this ministry, travel around, speak to youth and their leaders, get to write books and create videos as well. So it's a good time.
Yeah, praise God. That's awesome. So you're a young guy. I'm an old guy. I'm 62. So praise be to God, and God bless you for your ministry. Where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and lived there for most of my life.
Okay. When did you become a believer in Christ?
Yeah, early on, just growing up, going to church weekly, I early on understood the message of Jesus, the gospel, that God wanted this personal relationship with me, but my sin separated me. But responded that at an early age and got that, and I would say knew God personally, and had this awareness from a young age, probably between the ages of 4 and 7, had this awareness that God is real, He's personal, and was just doing life with Him.
Wow, that's awesome. So how did it come about that you went into the ministry full time? When did you sense or know that there was a calling, and how did you end up going with Cru?
Yeah, quite the story. In high school, was involved in a ministry called Young Life, which many people know about.
I know all about Young Life, yes.
Yeah, and loved just spending time with people who were in high school that were younger than me while I was in high school, and loved mentoring them and talking about Jesus. And in high school, at some point, I realized the greatest way I could spend my life was probably reaching people for Christ and helping them grow and understand why they're here, rather than going into some other field of work. So kind of had that awareness in high school, but then through a various series of events later in high school, started walking away from God and kind of just doing my own thing. Had a lot of anger towards Him through or because of a lot of the pain that I had experienced in life and doubts I had. And but during that time, I visited George Mason University, and my sister was going to school there. She was involved in Cru, and honestly, for one of the first times in my life, I felt truly accepted and loved for who I was by these people that were involved in Cru. So even though I didn't really want much to do with God at the time, because I was angry at Him, that's the main reason I went to school at George Mason. And after about 6 months or so, walking away from God, doing my own thing was just so unsatisfying. It wasn't working for me, and I knew that I still had a personal relationship with God, but was just angry at Him. But through being loved on, through lots of invitations from people to come to Cru, to get involved, I ended up going back, getting involved, following Jesus, and the rest is kind of history. Been involved in ministry ever since.
Praise God. So God chased you down.
Yeah, He sure did.
I see in metaphors sometimes, I see these pictures, and when I heard you just saying that, a little bit of your testimony, the picture that I saw was picture that in this metaphor, you have a giant rubber band attached to your back, like a bungee cord, and you decide you're going to get away from God. You're mad at God, so you start going the other way. You turn your back, and you're moving away. But the further you get, the tighter the rubber band's getting, right? And the harder and harder it's getting, is this tension increases. And when the tension gets strong enough, it eventually jerks you back. It pulls you back to God. So it's like, dude, you can try to get away from God all you want, and God's going to pull you back. And that's exactly what He did.
Yeah, He leaves the 99 to go after the one. He sure did chase me down, and just there's so many. Time would fail to explain all the ways that He went after me in that year and a half, and I just remember them so frequently. How God. The circumstances He put in my life.
I'm just curious, if you don't mind sharing, how would you put words to this anger? Why was this young man so angry at God?
Yeah, totally. So let's see. When I was in 8th grade, I got some kind of virus that was going around, and I was out of school for 2 weeks, and I had in the middle of the night I had like night terrors and would wake up hallucinating, and um, one of the things I started to obsess about, because well, early on in my life I started dealing with obsessive compulsive disorder, but through this traumatic 2 weeks of just feeling confused, and I couldn't think clearly, and I was so sick and was running a high temperature and having these night terrors and was so tired and could barely sleep. I started to have trouble because I was just so sick. Something happened where I started having trouble comprehending that God existed. It's like I knew He existed, and maybe I was just couldn't think clearly.
You just started having doubts, though, like a doubt.
Doubts. Not because of what I was experiencing, like that I was, angry at God, but I had doubts, and I'm not really sure what triggered those doubts. But I started with obsessive compulsive disorder. I started thinking, well, Christians don't have doubts, so I must not be a Christian. And
dude, whoever told you Christians don't have doubts? If that's true, I'm not a very good Christian.
Yeah,
because I've had my struggles.
Right. And well, early on in my life, I learned to kind of isolate and shut down, and I didn't think people were safe, and so I was just kind of wrestling with that on my own, and in my own mind, just going down this downward spiral. So what happened in those 2 weeks was every single time that I had any kind of inclination of a doubt about God's existence, and this is kind of how obsessive compulsive disorder works, right? There's like some taboo thing you try and avoid, but the more you try and avoid it, the more you think about it. So every time I doubted God's existence, I prayed to receive Christ again. So that started this this process of 10 years of upwards of 20 times a day doubting God's existence, and then praying the sinner's prayer, because I thought every time I doubted that I was no longer a Christian.
Wow.
And that I was going to die and go to hell. So I was living in torment.
Wow.
For 10 years, and over the years I kind of just stuffed these doubts down and hid them and didn't really talk to anybody about them, and slowly this anger was growing towards God, because I was like, God, I want to believe so bad, and I'm crying out to you, and I'm asking you as a teenager to take these doubts away, but you're not doing anything about them. So over and over again, fighting these doubts, anger was building, and then finally there's a couple circumstances, just getting sick and tired of being sick and tired of wrestling with this, and then the end of my junior year in high school, I remember my parents waking me up one morning, and they shared that my grandfather had died by suicide.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Were you close to your grandfather?
I wasn't that close with him.
But it was still a shocking, horrible tragedy, no doubt, and a traumatic event for you.
Yeah, it was traumatic. It was terrifying, and that was and up and even before that happened, there was just this. I'm 17, almost 18. These doubts have been going on for so long. This anger at God is building up. I'm just tired. I'm exhausted. And then that event happened, and I was like, whatever, God, I'm done. I still believe in you. I think, I have all these doubts, but how are you good if all of this continues to happen in my life? And that's the point where I started walking away.
Wow. Okay. And I just want to mention, you have a website that's called I'mLivingFree.com, right?
Yeah.
I'm Living Free. So I want to get that out there for our listeners. Just check out Ben's website, and he's got some awesome information there that I know will be a blessing to you. And the content of that website is complementary to the purpose of this podcast because it's called the Power of Purity Podcast. And the theme of the podcast has to do with sexuality. And as I'm sure that you know, this is an area that so many people struggle with in this day and age. We live in a highly sexualized culture. There's temptation all around us. There's internet pornography. And this hurts a lot of people, and the most recent statistics tell us that 70% of church-going Christian men view internet pornography on a regular basis. So I use the word plague or the word epidemic. It's an epidemic, and I'm talking about in the church, let alone outside. I'm just assuming guys outside the church watch porn. Why shouldn't they, It's an epidemic within the church among Christian guys, and I know all about that because I became a believer in Christ, and I love God, and I wanted to serve God. But I had this duplicity in my life that I could not resist sexual temptation. And so I would surrender to sexual temptation over and over and over again. And I'd feel guilt and I'd feel shame and I'd promise God, I won't do it again, God. I'll try harder. I'll pray harder. And I would try to push it away and it would always come back. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. So I was struggling with sexual purity. I didn't know how to bring this part of my life under the authority of Christ. And this is what you talk about on this website. I'm living free. You give information and tips and strategies and Bible verses and spiritual kingdom principles that relate to sexual purity, and you're trying to encourage people in this. So I understand that a big part of your story is that you yourself struggled with a porn addiction. I don't know if you'd call it a sex addiction, a porn addiction. So can you just share some of your story with us? Like, what did that look like for you? How did it play out? What happened?
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick on the website, I'mLivingFree.com, the whole point of that website is to help equip people to deal with this issue of walking in sexual integrity. There's only like 6 articles or resources on there, and there's some videos and whatnot. But in the midst of the amount of people struggling in the blogs out there and all of that, I wanted to take some of the most pertinent information to help people, whether it's accountability or understanding wounds and renewing their mind and where to begin and to share my story. It's been so encouraging. People are finding it all over the world.
Praise God. So you tried to boil down, I'm thinking of the concept of a common denominator, some
Yes.
basic common denominator issues and things that people need to understand if they're interested in purity. And so you've got what you think are some essential insights and information and principles that are strategic in this journey of purity.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like a 101, where do I begin? How do I help my kids, whether it's preventative resources or restorative resources? If I'm struggling, or if I want to protect my kids, or if one of my friends is struggling, just kind of where do I begin?
Okay, awesome. So I'm thinking, would you be willing to share your story with us first, and then maybe you can tell us more about the website and your ministry part of it, what you're doing?
Yeah, totally. So my story, I was exposed to pornography around the age of 12, and some of my friends on the street were interested in it, and they showed it to me and taught me about masturbation as well. And that quickly became something that I regularly sought out. It was just one more way that I learned how to survive and cope in life. And as a background on that, just growing up, I so often didn't feel like I belonged in this world. In my family, with my friends, I struggled with acceptance, and just wanted to feel loved for who I was. And
but there were insecurities. You weren't feeling these things. You were struggling.
Yeah. yeah, I would say that, and that's why, going away to college was so powerful for me, because I started to feel like learn who I was and feel accepted. But just growing up, getting in trouble for so many things, experiencing this kind of rigid and disengaged culture in the church, in my family, didn't, I would say, feel loved and accepted often, and was really, really hurting deep down as a kid. Had these unmet longings, as I call them, for safety, for acceptance, for the affirmation of my feelings. I just wanted somebody to enter my world and to understand me. And so by the age of 8, I started dealing with depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette, and I started having out of body experiences.
Wow.
What counselors call depersonalization disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was so afraid of rejection in group situations. So what my body started doing was, in order to protect myself, it was like I almost wasn't there. And of course, I wasn't talking to anybody about these things, because I learned early on that to be known and loved is actually to be rejected. So the people who are supposed to be there for me are going to hurt me. So I shut down. So I was just kind of going internal, dealing with all these things, didn't know what was going on. So
right. And how is an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, you have no frame of reference to even begin to understand what's going on with you, let alone make sense of it or articulate it, So this would all just be so overwhelming.
Yeah, and terrifying. And then, you add on top of that, when I was, the experiences that I had of the obsessions about going to hell, and then getting introduced to pornography when I was at the age of 12. Porn and masturbation and my sexual sin was about survival for me. I would say it was a glimpse of some type of feeling of acceptance, of affirmation, of love in this chaos that I was living in, this constant torment and fear and sadness.
That's so powerful, Ben, what you're saying, and I really relate to it because it's very familiar to my own story. In the verbiage of the recovery community, 12-step groups and such, if you're familiar with that at all, but they talk about trading what they call their FB, which is a feel bad. I feel bad. In other words, I'm stressed, I'm depressed, I'm upset, I feel overwhelmed, I'm afraid, I'm tired, I'm insecure, I'm fearful. Whatever my feel bad is, I don't want to feel bad, right? I want to feel good. So I trade my FB for an FG, which is a feel good. Mm. And so what can make me feel good right now? And as a kid, I found porn when I was, I think, 10 or 11 years old. And I quickly learned it made me feel good. I liked the feelings it gave me. And then I discovered masturbation. So it makes sense to me why a young boy, why this event is so powerful to him, because it isn't just a sexualized event. It's an emotional event. You're you're soothing yourself. You don't realize it, but you're anesthetizing yourself. You're self-soothing. Really, you're medicating. You're self-medicating. And you're trying to protect yourself from all these horrible feelings and confusions all around your life. So the porn becomes unbelievably powerful.
Yeah, ultimately, I was eroticizing my wounds. I was seeking some kind of nurture in pornography, in masturbation, in a world where I was constantly experiencing rejection. And I didn't know that at the time. It just felt good and felt like one more way to escape pain. But I was seeking the fulfillment of legitimate needs in illegitimate ways. But yet, the whole time, I knew it was wrong, so I was condemning myself. So I was in this process of, I already feel condemned by other people. Now I'm going to act out, and now I'm going to condemn myself and promise God that I'm never going to do this again. There's no thought of like self-love, self-care, self-nurture in all. It was just this process of nonstop shaming. But I quickly became addicted, and it got worse and worse over the years. But I wish I understood then what I know now, just about how hurting I was, and that Jesus was looking at me going, I love you, and I want you to find satisfaction and healing in healthy ways, in the ways that I have designed you to find fulfillment of those longings and that desire for acceptance in Him and safe people. That would have helped me so much with what I was struggling with, because after a while, I was no longer just believing lies from other people and the messages that they were telling me through their actions, but I was actually feeding them to myself and continually condemning myself, all the while that God was saying to me, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And He wanted to invite me into something so much better and greater, which eventually, in my healing journey, I began to experience.
But at this young stage in your life, you didn't have this relationship with Christ to understand these things. You didn't have these spiritual insights and understandings of God's kingdom. And so you're out there all alone just trying to figure life out. I'm picturing if a 12-year-old boy fell off a cruise ship and he's out in the water, he's just going to thrash, and he's going to dog paddle and try to keep his head above water and do everything you can do to just survive another day. And that's what you're doing at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do we go from there? I mean, so you find this porn when you're 12, and does this escalate then? It just kind of follows you through your teenage years, your adolescence, or how did it unfold?
Yeah, it definitely followed me, because when I first got introduced to it, I quickly realized that nothing could make me feel the way pornography and masturbation could make me feel. It was just such a high and such an escape. And my young, impressionable adolescent mind quickly latched onto that. So regularly began seeking it out. But back then, this would have been in the early 2000s. That was before high-speed internet, before smartphones, before I had access to a lot of hardcore pornography. So over the years, it was more of the like pictures, or sometimes I could access hardcore pornography, but it wasn't until mid to late high school for me that I got my own laptop, that we had high-speed internet, that I regularly could access hardcore pornography. And once it got to that level, it was just almost inescapable because of how
accessible. It's so accessible.
Yeah, and that too.
And it's constantly there, and it's so available.
And
there's hundreds and thousands of sites to go to. So I mean, it's an avalanche into your life and soul at this point.
Yeah, and then you add on top of that the pain when I was 17, 18, when I wasn't walking with God. It was just at that point I wasn't even trying to stop anymore. It was just a full-on binge and lifestyle, and accessing it as much as I could, which just led me further down the path of, this is how I cope, this is how I live, and regularly stick this out multiple times a week.
Wow. So this thing has followed you now, and not only has it followed you, but it feels like it's escalating. I'm picturing in my mind's eye, if you plant a seed, it sprouts, a root begins to grow, but then that root gets bigger and bigger and deeper. So it almost feels like for you, age 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, now you're into the hardcore internet pornography stuff, perpetual. I mean, the root is getting deeper and stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was for about a year and a half. Just like the full-on binge type lifestyle, multiple times a week. And then freshman year of college, when I got involved in this campus ministry, I went cold turkey, porn, masturbation, even sexual thought for 6 months, I think it was. But for those of us who know about addiction, compulsive issues, that's all it was, really. Just this trying harder mentality, this I'm abstaining, but I wasn't dealing with the deeper issues, all of the hurt that I was carrying, and I was going at it alone as well. Didn't have the support system I needed. So
right.
6 months in, as this 18-year-old who's on fire for Christ and rededicated his life to Christ, and I'm sharing the gospel with my non-Christian friends, and 5 days a week I'm going to Bible study or worship service or church, and just loving, what God is doing in my life and my experiences with Him, and feel so close to Him and others. All of a sudden, 6 months in, I'm back where I was 6 months ago.
Right. And it makes sense because you haven't really dealt with your root issues, and you're just trying to push this away to serve your conscience. You're loving God, you're in the ministry, you're trying to make this right with you and God, but kind of on the strength of your own resolve and self-determination and self-effort, you're trying to kind of manage this, but the fact is you haven't really dealt with the root issues yet, so we're not surprised that it ends up coming back. It's like, how about this for a metaphor? There's a big, huge beach ball, and you're in a swimming pool, and you decide, the beach ball's bad, so I'm going to push it down. I'm going to hold it under so it's gone. And how long can you hold a big beach ball down? You might be able to do it for a little bit, but dude, it's going to wear you out, and it has a way of popping back up, So 6 months later, this thing pops back up in Ben Bennett's life.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And with that being said, Ben, I see from the clock that we're out of time for today's episode, so I'd like to wrap up here, and then we'll continue next week with part 2 of Ben's story. So thank you for being here, Ben. God bless you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Tony.
And let me just say once again, guys, check out Ben's website at imlivingfree.com. Check that out this week, and then look forward to coming back next week, where we will continue with part 2 of Ben's story. I know that you'll be blessed. In the meantime, go on with God. Be blessed this week as you pursue Christ and as you pursue your walk of purity. God bless you, and we'll see you right back here next week. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.